I just want to see if Sacha is here. Hi, Sacha.
Hi.
Greetings. How are you?
Good to hear your voice and see your face again, albeit very small.
Just wondering how to, let's just see what's going on here in terms of the Zoom. Are you okay to be pinned up as the main speaker? Would you like to be with everybody?
I'm happy to be on screen. Otherwise, it might be a bit dislocating to hear me talk, but not see how I'm deceiving you through my eyes.
Okay. So welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us. It's
Great.
Wonderful to have you. I know you've been busy with your own symposium, your own EQUINOX symposium. And I just wondered if you'd like to give us a little bit of an update on how that went. I was really interested in some of the topics.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fascinating. So speaking with Santos Bonacci joined us, of course, the godfather of syncretism, and presented his very remarkable case for the plane of inertia, meaning to say flat Earth, so-called flat Earth. Let me just say that it upsets me when people become very reductive and binary about the flat Earth, round Earth thing, because people seem to fail to understand what that dialectic represents. It's a very important dialectic in the consciousness of each one of us, because it's about
Has something happened to the sound, or is it just me?
And that's precisely where we're at, where we have war and disease and poverty prevailing in a world. And we have 8 billion souls in varying degrees of torment. That describes reality today for most humans, most of the time. And so the emergent theme of round Earth versus flat Earth is not just a bunch of scurrilous hoodies in the basement dreaming up a new, storyline to have fun with amongst the truther community. That's a stupid, reductive way of looking at it. It's a re-emergent theme which visits us cyclically and civilizationally, as it did in the medieval times. 500 years ago, we were obsessed with the notions of flat Earth and round Earth for good reason, because we didn't fucking know. And we wanted to know. We wanted to put our feet squarely on the earth and have an idea of the sanctity of that foothold. So here we are again, the year 2021, in the 21st century, and we still have not identified whether we're on an ovoid planet, a torus planet, a hollow planet, a concave one, and that's a beautiful thing. So Santos Bonacci came to present the metaphysical and philosophical, and dare I say it, spiritual debate on the plane of inertia, where the Shiva and the Shakti, where the dualistic elements of creation always create a counterpoint, a still point, which becomes a plane upon which stuff emerges. Beautifully considered presentation by Santos, and then followed by Dr. Brooks Agnew, for those of you who don't know, a remarkable scientific mind, and a man who is, I think history will reflect, is really one of the signature minds of our day today. So Brooks Agnew for years has been investigating the Agartha, so-called the hollow earth, the concave earth, the hollow earth model of reality, and has identified as a scientist and as an engineer that it absolutely must be thus. It can only be thus. We can only have a hollow sphere. We cannot be living on a hard, molten lava. What a bullshit model is that? The one we've been sold by the Cartesian, Newtonian, to some extent Einsteinian spin on reality has not served real reality. So we still have a vacuum inside of our consciousness because it's reflective of the vacuum on the inside of the earth. And Dr. Brooks Agnew laid forth in the Lazarus Symposium his beautifully considered presentation on that. Now, it gets better because Dr. Brooks Agnew is taking a group of scientists and academics, and I will be amongst them, to the inner earth to demonstrate. We know that there is a passage in the North Pole. Whether you can breach the water or whether you can sail around the lip into the inner earth, some question mark there. But we know absolutely that there is an inner earth passage. We know that birds migrate every year to that northern region. Birds that otherwise cannot withstand the cold, but before the cold sets in, real cold, Arctic cold, they go north. Where do they go to? And then when the ice melts and breaks, they fly back again. So that's been observed for generations. We know that something's going on there, and it's a beautiful thing because, again, it also raises very important questions about the legitimacy of our geopolitical compact. The fact that we mandate this rotten technology called government to watch over us like some perverted Saturnian godfather who decides whether or not we will know the nature of reality, who decides when we can have crumbs of truth flicked at our faces, who indentures us into registrations and certificates of birth and death and marriage and all the rest of it, and then securitizes us as living souls wrapped in flesh, bonded to tracts of paper, flipped into treasury bonds. And the rest of our life is chattel, cattle, stock, trade, back to the mercantile premise of the black nobility, the Phoenicians, the Jesuits, the Catholics, the ones who stand between us and our divinity. So it's an important conversation, round earth, flat earth. The way I'm taking the conversation, it invites us to really re-identify the degree to which we have individually and collectively chosen to allow ourselves to be part of a perpetual harvest wheel of blood sport and mindfuckery, because that's what it is. Coming on to that panel as well, the Lazarus Symposium panel, I had David Sarita, a godfather of frequency and understanding the hallowed nature of isotopes, frequencies, of what the confluence of the fabric of reality is, an orchestra of frequencies, either coherent frequencies or incoherent frequencies, and a coherent frequency ultimately leading us to euphoria, to bliss, to the orgasmic state, to creative abundance and material prosperity, limitless expansiveness and capacity to transduce divine light into our crown and infuse our bodies with this life force and radiate that life force into the lateral plane, by extension affect the lives, the fate, and the outcome of not just ourselves, but of anyone and everyone that comes into our field of expression.
It's interesting, Sacha, just to find you again and pin you here, because I got booted off as you started. So I just want to pin that again. But how it's actually so beautiful to be entering the center, symbolically going into the center. It's like deeper within, in a way, and to the mother's heart or soul. Maybe even more important than, for example, going to the moon. We were talking a lot about this idea that the moon has been cleared for visits and stuff like that. But possibly the occupation of our consciousness into the center of the earth, reuniting with some of the brothers and sisters that are there already, might be more important than leaving this planet for now.
Yes, agreed. To which end we had the NASA rocket scientist Shanaz Soni, my colleague, also on the panel. And she's the rocket scientist building the module for the dark side of the moon on the 2024 mission upcoming. And she's also a metaphysician and a remarkably accomplished human being above all. But it was very interesting to get her perspective as a de facto NASA rocket scientist with Santos Bonacci, and her able to express what you're presenting makes a great deal of mathematical sense. And Dr. Brooks Agnew, absolutely what you're presenting makes absolute sense. This is pure integrity of science and math, that coming from a NASA rocket scientist who is predisposed to the Cartesian and Newtonian model of a sphere, but of a circle, forgive me. So the point being that, yes, what you say is correct, Amanda. This is all just symptomatic or totemistic of our need and the timeliness of that need for each of us to reconvene with Central Sun. I would put it that way. And I would also hazard that Central Sun is in essence a feminine quanta. Now, I'm happy to speak to this with some knowledge. We were involved many years ago, my foundation, in protecting certain patents and evolving certain scientific method. Let me put it that way. This is in 2009, 2010, 2011, so 12 odd years ago. And at that time, we were working with copper pyramids, magnetic accelerators, subspace broadcasting crystals encoded with a certain information. I may have touched on this in our last chat, I can't remember, but we tapped into the collective frequency of the human heart and managed to pull that value in, the frequency value, into the subspace chamber, and then grow crystals off that value. And those crystals became so powerful that you couldn't touch them or you'd lose consciousness. We had people trying sensitives and clairvoyants would literally, I did this in my own home in London on occasion to see for myself, because I couldn't believe it. And I would hide the crystals, albeit the crystals at that point were covered in carbon sleeves and then put inside slate boxes, literally, like sarcophagi. And then I would hide the crystals somewhere in my home in London and invite the sensitives or clairvoyants there. And they would invariably find their way directly to where it was, because the etheric presence of these crystals was so extraordinary. Now, bottom line being, and what I'm driving at is that we did a lot of hard math and physics and science and experiments over a decade ago, connected to the Central Sun, because it was the Central Sun and it was a feminine presence or feminine intelligence within the Central Sun who was actually communicating to us and giving us the math. not just the math, but the geometry as well. So as we evolve those series of experiments up to and including somebody disappearing from inside the copper pyramid. And actually, this is a smaller group. I'll say it. It was Margot Anand.
Wow. So she teleported.
She was conducting the Song of the Immortals, and she'd come in for a 5 or 6 hour samadhi, whatever she does, goes into a very deep state and just doing these mantras. Now, she's very practiced. The woman is almost 80 years old. This was 10 years ago. So she was at her point in life of 70 years and 10, and she'd been to visit the immortals in Nepal or Burma, wherever it was, and she'd learned a great deal. She came back and wanted to bring that mantra into the experiment because she understood what we were working on. We were learning how to activate the so-called crystal grid of the earth with intentional placement of crystals on certain geo nodes, which we spent a couple of years doing, up to and including hanging out of light aircraft to drop the crystals on particular points on the earth that you couldn't get to otherwise. So we took it as far as we could take it. And yours truly was funding much of it. So, but the point is that we learned so much at that time. And when we arrived at a given point in the laboratory, and our main lab was in Gothenburg in Sweden. And what we learned through the various sensitives and Diksha masters and people who are very connected into the subtle realms of communication, what they uniformly told us at that time was, we are being communicated to by a feminine presence issuing through the central sun. And
it kind of reminds me of like the soul of Gaia, because soul being sun, soul being central Gaia. Right. So, could it be Gaia's soul that is talking?
Who knows? And this is the point. We're still at that kindergarten stage. I mean, we were trying to push the envelope until certain things happened. And some of the experiments that we did went odd, and I mean very odd. You talk about spontaneous combustion, things bursting into flame in the room. Whoa, stop. What are we doing here? What hyperdimensional or subdimensional or intradimensional or supradimensional energetics are we bringing into the temporal realm? Stop. So my function as the head of the foundation, which was conducting these experiments, was to go stop. No. So I did stop. And the same thing, just anyone who may be interested, the same thing with the cutie pie.
Do you want to tell us what the cutie pie is? I think a lot of people wouldn't know. I actually got to see it myself. Right. It was so exciting.
Well, the cutie pie, I don't want to get too far into it without having illustrations to show you. It'll bore people, but it was a free energy, quote unquote, technology or over unity technology that we were working with and developing, which ultimately found its way into the Fritz Pop laboratory in the Netherlands. The most advanced lab in a sense for that kind of high frequency analytic.
And it's shaped like a donut, isn't it? Well, and based on rodent's coil.
We shaped it like not rodent's coil, because it wasn't connected to that application, but it was a big donut, an epoxy donut, beautifully designed with spirals and what have you. And it was, it was yielding. The point is this: we knew that we were able to yield a so-called over unity, and I hate that term as well. I've learned to not speak in terms of free energy or over unity, but we were yielding a phenomenon, energetic in respect of output. But what we learned and what we were then told by the laboratory technicians was step away, because every time you're turning this device on, every time you are generating so-called over unity and light bulbs are going on, at the same time, you appear to be tapping into an under unity waveform, and we have no fucking idea what's coming into the temporal realm, but our psychics in the laboratory are saying, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off now. So my suspicion at that time was we are doing what CERN, the Super Hadron Collider, is doing by design. We are unwittingly unleashing some form of under unity waveform whilst we're forcing an over unity waveform, and we're playing with hyperdimensional intelligence or expression that we don't understand, and we could be bringing the diabolical into the 3D realm. That was my intuition, and that was absolutely categorically stated to me by many sensitives who were working with us. So I closed it down, walked away. That was my reason at that time. Now we're getting to a different point in our, let's say, our evolutionary status, where the measure and the quality of the vibral light that is impacting our solar system and our plane of existence is such that it's now taking us into that realm where there is a natural or innate protections built into the light coding that we could get away with certain experiments today that we couldn't get away with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Now that's my contention, and I'm seeing it play out, because ultimately I've also evolved to the reckoning that you and I'm seeing Roy, and I'm seeing Judith, and I'm seeing Amy, and I'm seeing Karen and Amanda on my screen.
A lot of people, there's 48 here today.
Okay, but that's who I'm seeing on my screen at the top. And each one of us are the divine capacitors. So I've now grown sufficiently to recognize that all of this playing with toys and shapes is kind of kids' play. Really, ultimately, Merkaba and invoking Merkaba and aligning one's quanta to Central Sun in that state of grace and the still point is all we ultimately need to do. We can still have fun with technology. Why not? God knows I'm doing it. Why am I doing the Lazarus Symposia and publishing the Lazarus Journal and bringing together who I deem to be the world's leading physicists, astrotheologians, archaeocosmologists, and experts in frequency and sound? And because we have to take that conversation forward, because we've been lied to, and because academia is so saturated and infused with deception that it's incumbent upon us to conduct the conversations moving forward. And the fact that I'm able to also bring in, like I said, rocket scientists, people in the establishment now, indicates that we are on the threshold of a reconvention as well within academia of true history and correcting history. I'm just about to begin a series with Susan Bradford, the author and academic researcher. Now she's, as I understand it, the world's leading researcher expert on bloodlines. Royal Blood Lies was the name of one of her books, and the Tartarian Treachery is her latest book. And she and the Black Nobility, all of that stuff is how we begin to correct history, because we here know that it was the Sabbatean element, the Jesuitical element within the Catholic Church, using the apparatus of the Vatican complex and its dominion over the world for at least the last half millennia, but going back essentially 2,000 years or 1,700 years to the Council of Nicaea, but essentially in the last 500 years, since the 1600s, that dominion has been so absolute that the Jesuit element within the Catholic Church was able to fully infiltrate and corrupt the church, and then by extension corrupt the bedchambers of the kings and queens of all dynasties in the world, from the Meiji in Japan to the Chinese and to the Belgian and Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish, English, and so it goes on. I mean, God knows the Jesuits got to the fucking king in Swaziland as well. You know, they got all around the world. I know in the last couple of years, I've sat with 36 sultans and kings of kings just in Southeast Asia alone. And each of these kingdoms, enormous kingdoms, have been historically subverted by the Jesuits and the Vatican. And it's only now that they're recovering and beginning to get some clarity on history. But I want to go forward now very dynamically and correct the history. So we're about to launch either a 10 or a 12-part series on the Black nobility and those dynastic traditions. Yeah.
So Sacha, do you think that the mountains of Lesotho and Swaziland, etc., are still very much Cabal dominated? Do you think that there's still massive infiltration in Africa, or do you think we're starting to see some of that breaking down?
Yes and no. I can only again speak to my experience and what I know and who I speak to. I just don't want to speculate, and I don't want to fall victim to the law of first report, where I simply repeat to you what I've read from someone else. So it's not my method. What I know categorically is that the gold has already been essentially stolen and sequestered. So, and I don't know how much of it. One doesn't know if all of the gold in the caves in Bophuthatswana or in Ethiopia, we don't know if all of the gold was stolen, hijacked, sequestered by the Vatican complex, aka the Anglo-American Federal Reserve, Crown of England, Vatican Corporation. We don't know how much of it, except that we know that it's happened. We know that the Philippine gold, we know that the Chinese gold, we know the Indonesian gold is still in the care of caretakers in that part of the world. So the hereditary elders, dragons and what have you, in the main are still sitting on the stockpiled Solomon's gold. And that's in cave systems and elsewhere. I've seen some of it. I've been taken to see some of it. I've handled some of the gold and the platinum myself. So I know the veracity of that. And I also understand how nebulous the story is around all of that historical gold, connected to the treaties that were struck 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago by the Jesuits and the ancestors of these custodians today. And it's a travesty. The whole thing is a travesty because they were all systemically lied to so badly. And the treaties mean nothing. And I've studied these tracts. I've been taken in by some of these code-named white hats who've taken me in and very kindly sat with me and allowed me to handle some of the paperwork, albeit they've been kind of guarded with plastic now in order to prevent them, corrupting. But I've seen the original treaties that created the formation of Alsace-Lorraine and parts of Europe, going back just to the European story. It's so nebulous by design. The Jesuits/Catholic Church came in and hacked at the taproots of everything that was real and true in our world. Everything. And then stole into the bloodlines of the imperial dynasties and literally inserted their deviant draconian sperm into the wombs of Queen Victoria and others who were breeding mares for Rothschildian, Sabbatean element. So those were unholy compacts, trysts that were forced into play with the takeover of the Merovingian dynasties, the true Christic bloodlines. Because there were good priest kings, there were good Templar knights, there were good leaders and the kings of old and queens of old. Absolutely there were. But that all became subverted. Okay, step back. We're not victims. It happened because at the oversoul level, we collectively said, okay, let's get really fucked over for half a millennia. Let's invite the draconian element into our blood. And at that collective unconscious level, we granted the permissions for that interventionism. Be clear about that. But it happened, and it caused an inordinate amount of suffrage. And I'm talking about the overthrow of the true majesty of the golden dawn that we were living through, the golden ages of Tartarus and so on, that we had etheric transmission of energy at that time. We had the star forts and all of these extraordinary phenomena that are being unveiled today. And the pyramids that are being unearthed from Bosnia to Indonesia today are all testament to the fact that we had all of this ancient knowledge, more or less. And we had the capacity to transduce dielectric forces and paramagnetic forces and create cold electricity and etheric transmission. And we were building extraordinary things, friends. Go to India, go to and look at some of the extraordinary Petra in Jordan, you know, and all around the world in point of fact. You can go to Guatemala or Zimbabwe, you're going to see this incredible stuff. I mean, engineering and stone carvings of entire cityscapes in solid granite that happened almost by a magic wand, using technologies that we couldn't even conceive of today. And that's before we even get to, you know, the crystal skull, the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull, held by my dear friend Bill Homan. I'm just writing him name down here because I do want to remember to invite him to the Lazarus Symposium. But so Bill, God love him, inherits from Anna the Mitchell Hedges the skull, and that was taken in, you know, just a few short years ago into Hewlett Packard's laboratories. And what did they do? They analyzed this thing, gave it back and said, we have not the faintest idea how this was made. What we do know is that there is no technology on the face of the earth capable of manufacturing that out of a solid piece of quartz today. We have no advanced laser capabilities to even remotely approach that kind of engineering. Why? Because you've got a perfectly articulated crystal skull with an articulating jaw. And no breakages, the whole thing. Now we know, now listening to the Mayans, listening to the true stories, that was fashioned from thought. You know, in one final event before the calamity befell the end of that civilization, they convened and had to encode and encrypt into these crystal skulls the sum total of their knowledge, which was a gift. And they were smart enough to know that if they projected it into a riddle like a articulating quartz crystalline skull, that it would always be preserved. Whoever found it would keep it in a cave or in a bookshelf, and it would never get destroyed. Very smart move, that.
Do you think that those are similar to like a teleportation device, those skulls, similar, you know, sort of like a portal that, you know, those priests or whoever, you know, would use, almost similar to the stones, like the Adam's calendar stones. Yeah. I've seen the stones are actually bones with a crystalline structure or nature and coding, and that they can be used to as a jump gate. I'm just interested in, you know, if those crystalline skulls, the crystal skulls might be, you know, say the keepers of, you know, the guardians of the old, maybe even, or I don't know.
It's very possible. And I think the point is that we now enter into the realm of the limitless, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm not trying to peg a particular story to the crystal skulls. I know my own experience. I've not yet met with the Mitchell Hedges skull, but it did come knocking on my door. So 12, 13 years ago, whenever this happened, and my engagement at that time with the skull was because I was phoned and told the skull wants to meet you. And I said, well, I don't want to meet an artifact. Thank you. I'm too busy. But I did, and because I didn't know about it either at that time, and I didn't understand this mystery element. But what I did do was at the time sent my PR woman and she flew to, I think it was the south of France, to get on a boat where the skull was on a boat waiting to meet with me or my representative. And because the skull was communicating that I had some role to play in helping to get its message or its transmission to leadership or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but I do know she went and she came back and said, and she was a very circumspect woman and no bullshit, no woo-woo woman, like, oh, I'll go and see the skull. So great. She went, came back and went, my God, that was the most transformative experience of my life. I'm like, okay, now I'm interested. What happened? And then I understood that when you're alone with the skull, if the skull, it does communicate to you categorically, and it's very transformative. So from that point, I took it seriously. And then what I did do was I patched the skull in to meet with certain spiritual avatars and masters and what have you. And I heard that wonderful transmissions occurred, and I was satisfied with that. And I've kept a kind of loose contact with Bill Homan subsequently, but I've not yet been in a room alone with the skull. And I intend to, at some point I'll do it. I'll just, and I'll get back and tell you what happens.
Yeah, there's actually 3 crystal skulls in South Africa. There's a woman, Walsh, can't think of her first name now, but who is a holder of 2 big ones and a baby. And then Credo Mutua had a jade skull. And I'm not really sure where that is at the moment, but that might be interesting to reconnect with her.
Well, but Amanda, my takeaway from all of this stuff is that they are triggers and catalysts, they are totems, and they are icons, these artifacts and these stories. And what they encode always is some extraneous totem of our own redemption or salvation or absolution stories. So for me, I've increasingly disidentified from anything extraneous or external, anything. I don't care how mysterious it is. I've seen shit in this world with these eyes that beggars belief. I've engaged the Draco-reptilian thing. I've been pulled into some Celestine realms. I've never chewed a magic mushroom or smoked dope in my life. I'm very sober. I know that I have seen extraordinary things and a pantheon of out of place artifacts. I've also been pulled in by governments at times to be involved. Humanitad has to be involved in dealing with. The last time was a transdimensional device that the Maltese government had took custody of, that was handed to them, and they couldn't work out what it was, and it was spooking the hell out of them. And they contacted Dr. Brian O'Leary, the former science astronaut from NASA, the Apollo 17, I think, mission leader. And Brian, who was a bit of a tear away from NASA toward the end of his life, and a beautiful human being. Any of those of you who saw the film What the Bleep will know who I'm talking about. But Brian told the Maltese government, don't speak to me about this, speak to Sacha Stone. He's the one who's got a brain trust and does weird science, which is true. So they contacted me, and I got embroiled in, and one of our trustees, who happens to be a world-leading cultural anthropologist, flew in to handle that project with the Maltese government and take custody of this transdimensional device. And we have a story there which will blow your minds. And I've not told the story publicly, and I think it's going to be okay to do so. So at some point, I intend to reveal the photographs and tell the story of what occurred, because it is just staggering what was experienced, what we experienced with this transdimensional. And that was going back, I mean, possibly 2007, 2008. I mean, really, 13, 14 years ago. And what I just learned, my own experience over the years with these external or extraneous artifacts, is I've learned to disidentify my sense of wonder and wonderment and awe from any totem outside of self, any. I've learned to bring the state of wonderment only into the center, the state of the witness, of the I am, because I know that is the only way in and out. The bodhisattva state is the only way in and out of the realm of tears, of sorrow. But I'm blessed that I have seen so many extraordinary things and met so many extraordinary people. So for me, I was able to go, you know what, there's something that's not the unknown out there. That's not where the question mark and the curiosity should be purposed. We need to bring that back into the center of self in order to actualize, and then see all of creation as being wonderment. God knows a cat wakes up in the morning, opens its eyes and sees X-ray. It's seeing all sorts of weird, subtle dimensional stuff and engaging with discarnate spirits. And cats live in that amazing realm because they are constantly living in hyperdimensional realms. And other animals, to some great extent, different animals do as well. Point being, the point I'm making is that it seems to be the preserve only of the stupid human to have reduced ourselves and our bandwidth to 2 or 3% of capacity, and to somehow find that acceptable. Well, I don't.
So, Sacha, one of the things, I'm just going to ask this one more question, then open it up to a couple of people who have some questions for you. But this whole debate about the Jesus Strand and, you know, the lineage of Christ, sort of, you know, that kind of thing. It's interesting in, you know, in another way of people giving their power away again to like a bloodline thing. So, you know, have you sort of thought about that dialogue, or where is it at the moment? I mean, do you have any like idea about whether, I mean, I guess it's irrelevant at the moment, but, you know, Mary Magdalene and Yeshua ben Joseph supposedly married, had children, came into Africa. The Black Madonna was supposed to be one of the children, and therefore the bloodline came into Africa. Interesting in some ways, but also not interesting in that we know that this Christ consciousness arising within us is really the key more than another bloodline. Yes.
So I can only speak to this very interesting question. It's a bit fuzzy, the question, but I absolutely get what you're asking. Or what you're speaking to. And my sense, again, Amanda, is that we must be very, very careful here, that we are not allowing ourselves yet again to become indentured into mysterium, cult, fantasia, which is a labyrinthine and very nebulous place for us to purpose our minds and our hearts and our ideation. It's how the Babylonian priesthood had prevailed for so long, by conducting an orchestra of chaos in such a way that they sprinkle these eternal conundrums into the field, either through academia or through media or through whatever. And this has been going on an awful long time. And I can tell you that millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of brave and noble inquiring souls, sage old men and women with gray beards and saggy tits, have, as witches and warlocks, done everything possible to divine the true nature of so many of these mysteries over the generations. There's a good reason why they've never arrived at consensus, because consensus is not possible. So when we're looking at Black Madonna, we're looking at the Black Jesus. For me, we're into a very, very, very fuzzy realm. We know that Jesus was more black than white, because that's just the nature of the Levant. He may have been a perfect fusion of black and white, but certainly he was not. He didn't look like Caesar Borgia's son, or whoever the fuck we're looking at now, when we see this perfectly appointed creature with a trimmed beard. I mean, what a travesty that is. What an absolute travesty that we pin the Christic quanta of pure light onto a false image. What a travesty that is. To which end, let me use this platform to salute Islam, and to salute the fact that Islam had the courage to say there will be no graven images, and we will not put a face to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. and don't allow for that kind of iconoclasticism, mindfuckery, dream spell, spellbinding. Quite right. The Christians didn't. The Christians relied, the Catholic Church relied entirely on dream spell, on spellbinding, on totemism, on iconoclasticism to bewitch stupid peasants and serfs into offering up tithes to the church, coin to the church, and ultimately the fabric of soul to the church, because that is what we tithe to the church now. The church is the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England and the Vatican Bank. That is the church. And we tithe our souls to it. How? By paying taxes, coin to Caesar. What is coin? Coin is gold. It is the symbol of the false light in the manifest realm, and we devote our time and our motion and our life force, our vocations, our occupation, our work, our jobs are purposed toward time, motion, money, and we pay that to the crown, to Cronus, the titan that devours its own young. And so it goes on. So I'm just explaining there how we're tithing the fabric of soul to black light, to the black sun. I don't believe, Amanda, in final analysis, that it is important that we understand the pepperings of mysterium cult that have been littered all around the world. I think it's very dangerous that we, beyond a certain point, expend life force or ideation on these questions, on these narratives, on these ideas, only because the true realm of the archetypes exists in the innerscape. And we can explore that realm if we have the courage to meet with self, and if we have the courage to engage the true covenant, which is the alignment of self with our divinity, which is to align my will be done with thy will be done, and to stand perfectly in that exquisite flame of pure truth. That's the calling. That's where all mysteries lead. I just invite people to step away altogether from pictures and from icons and from idolatry. And curiously enough, if any of us are serious about the mystical traditions of either the Buddhist faith or the Christian faith or the Muslim faith or the faith of Confucius and the Taoists, then we need to acknowledge the fact that all of those great mystics and saints and prophets are unified in one thing. And they invited us to never, ever give ourselves over idolatry.
Okay, I want to just open the floor a little bit for some other people to ask some questions. We've got some people from Ghana. There's Blessing who's here as well today again. I know she had a couple of questions about Ghana. I just want to see how to do that. Blessing, are you there? Let me just see what I can do to open up the floor a little bit. I'm going to take it out of the speaker view just for one moment. Oh, we have special guests. We seem to have a Simon Parks and a Becky Parks joining us today. Wow, what a privilege. How exciting. Hello. Hello. Wow.
Hi there. Hi there. We saw the link and wanted to just join in.
To show our support.
Yeah, to show our support. It's lovely to see you all here. And
wow,
thank you
for
speaking to our African CC group.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Hi, Becky.
Hi, Sacha. Hi.
Good to see you.
Do you guys want to say anything? Sacha and Rebecca, Simon, would you like to say anything? Have the floor for a minute?
Just really that Sacha is an absolute old rogue, and I'm only here today just to keep an eye on him.
Very good.
No, the point about Sacha is that he's highly intelligent and highly spiritual. So when you mix the two, you actually get a good speaker. You know, I'm here actually, so is Becky, because we actually love to hear what Sacha has to say. I'm really, really pleased that he's been able to connect. You know, he's connected to Africa, as am I. So I'm sure he takes every opportunity he can to, you know, make that connection. So no, just blessings and you know, just get on with it, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. So exciting to have you on our stream. Okay, so Blessing, are you around? Would you like to ask your questions about Ghana? She might not have a Blessing. Okay. Yes, would you like to have a bit of space to ask your questions?
Yes. I have a question for Sacha, and my first question is actually about the Black movement. You know, a lot of Black communities have made a religion around the Jews, about being the Jew, the special Jews, and many of them live angry at white people, and they feel white people are the cause of their problems, and you see this hatred in them. Now, going forward, how are we going to draw these people to us in this awakening? How are we going to draw these people? Because I don't see people of different color as the problem, but these are people who have made a religion about being the secret Jews. They've made a religion about being the so-called people of God, the promised people of God. So every day I think about them, and I wonder, because I've interacted with a lot of us here on the platform, and there are many of us who are very passionate. Although you are white, you are passionate about Africa, but there are Black people who hate white people and feel that they are the cause of the problem or the backwardness of the Blacks. So, Sacha, this question is to you. How do we draw these people? How do we change their mind? How do we make them look forward that we are all one? And the enemy is not Black or white. The enemy are the globalists. They are the Luciferian cabals who are behind all the challenges that we face.
Right. Thank you, Blessing. So I want to answer the question at the beginning. We do it by recognizing that that we are manifesting the reality in our lives, Alpha, Omega. Everything that is manifesting on the radar screen of my life is perfectly anointed and perfectly appointed geometry. It's the geometry that I am choosing to project into the realm of manifest realm of ideation, because it is purposed toward a perfect self-revelation, self-reflection of all that I am in the now. That's not to say that it can't always be a higher outcome and a better outcome. It can be that, but it can only be that when I own the fact that I am the architect and the engineer and the progenitor of all that I experience. So that's the Alpha Omega still point. We have to keep coming back to that, stepping absolutely outside of any notion of victimization. So you talk a lot of things you touched upon. Let's touch on the Jewish thing for a moment, because it's a very sensitive one. Let me invite you first to look right now at the geometry of today, what is taking place in Nazareth and in Tel Aviv, in Israel. The Holocaust is what's taking place. There is an enactment right now of the Holocaust in Israel amongst the so-called Jewish people. Who's conducting that Holocaust? It's the crypto Jews that are hiding within Judaism, that live behind gated mansions, either in Tel Aviv, or if they're smart, it'll be probably in Geneva or London or Los Angeles. But the crypto Jews, which is the Sabbatean Jewish element. They have never been Jewish. They don't belong to any faith or persuasion. They are Sabbatean. They are generational. They are invariably blood drinking. We can speak to that as well at great length. And their proxies that they control, their initial primary circle of influence and secondary and tertiary circles of influence connected to them. These are the high-ranking technocrats, Anthony Fauci being a classic case in point. The proxy billionaires and Silicon Valley icons like the Mark Zuckerbergers or the Bill Gateses, these are manufactured icons who are owned and contained by these same Sabbateans. They control and own the parent corporation, which issues from Israel and from what they intend as the throne of Solomon. And there's a long and rather complex story to that, which we certainly won't be going into here. But what you need to recognize is that it is not Jews who have done all the evils that we ascribe to Jews. It has been non-Jews, crypto-Jews, and that's an old story. And it's one that the planet Earth had better wake up to now and finally understand corrected history, or we're in deep, deep trouble because we're being led to the precipice of a very similar outcome of the First World War and Second World War and Napoleonic Wars. All the great wars have been part of the same convocation of witchery, of wickedness, of this Rothschildian, this red shield, this Sabbatean, Saturnian logic that's being played on the chessboard of our lives, pitting Jews against Muslims, against Christians, against Buddhists, against its constant dialectic theme. We must not fall victim to that any longer because we can only hold ourselves responsible for it. You also said, quite rightly, that the globalists are the enemy. But let's look at that blessing. That is true and it's not true in equal measure. The globalists only prevail by the extension of my permissions and my benedictions. I am the one who is filling out the forms. I am the one who is paying coin to Caesar. I am the one who is paying attention, life force, to the statutes and the so-called laws that govern the kingdom of the devil as it relates to globalism, the way our governments are constructed, the way our municipalities conduct business, the way the police conduct business. It's commerce. They have business cards. It's business. The way that all of that crept in, and human exchange and relationship and dialogue was dislocated from our convention with the sacred soil in the first place, our relationship with the land, when we were living connected to the soil as farmers, as fishermen, as forest dwellers, living connected to the sacred soil as Adamites, as good humans. That relationship was dislocated. And then we were scattered asunder and 1,000 languages prevailed. That's the Babylonian mythos. And we then started to construct different enterprises, different cityscapes, different technology applications, different languages, different everything. And all then arriving at a fulmination of those different identities. And then we turn toward each other and start to fight. Because that's all part of the failure of our remembrance of who we are and the majesty of who we are. The globalism is something which comes into the field of expression at the perfect time to remind us of our individuation and create a backdrop and a texture against which we can now emerge as diamonds in the coal, with perfected geometry in our characters and our nature. So it is the true Christic, Adamite, realized, actualized human that is going to be emerging now out of this backdrop of globalism and of monoculture and of sacrilege. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. The point being, and I'll sign off on this, Blessing, is that we're putting attention on the wrong question, and we're raising the wrong question. We're asking the wrong question, because simply by placing attention on the Jewish conundrum is to be energizing it. The true chosen ones, if we want to get into that bullshit, the true chosen ones are probably the Irish, actually. If you want to get into bloodlines and really understand the Christic element of blood and the chosen tribe, you're probably the Irish are the ones holding that mantle. But even that is no longer important. We must transmute and transcend all notions of duality, and we must individually awaken from the trial of separation, because it is something which is self-designated, and we're the ones who do it to ourselves. You see, I genuinely don't have any antithesis, I've got no anger any longer towards the Queen of England or the Jesuits or the European Union or the globalists or the Federal Reserve or the sock puppet in Capitol Hill, or, you know, all of these icons have just all kind of become part of the same homogenized, toxic soup of deception. And I know what I know, which is that the true actualized humanity is the gift, the benediction, the blessing that is emerging today out of all of this cacophony of wickedness. And this connecting consciousness grouping of souls is testament to that. Never before in our history have people convened like this to simply push the envelope of pure inquiry into the fabric of human soul, who we are, what are we, how do we keep purposing mind, body, and soul toward the highest outcome. Wow, this to me is the living testament. So let's just not try to answer questions that relate to orchestrated themes and narratives that have been planted into the field by those very crypto Jews, crypto humans, because they're not even human, they're subhuman. I hope, Blessing, that my rambling has given you some indication of an answer.
Thank you so much, Sacha, for answering that, for Blessing. What comes to mind is, I just wanted to mention it, is the science or biology of Bruce Lipton, which has been quite important in terms of the understanding of the activation of our own genetic expression based on the perceptions, you know, from the environment. And what we have to do, because what he speaks about is that the signal from the environment activates the genes. And if we can, and perception is the key to interpreting the environment. So if we can control our perception of the environment, if we learn to master ourselves or to move towards mastery, so instead of, like you say, instead of seeing, you know, great bloodlines, you know, outside of ourselves, if we start seeing the golden bloodline within us, or whatever that is, you know, so that that perception will activate, that perception will send a signal into our genes through the epigenetic expression and activate that expression of the genes. I mean, that's essentially what it is that we're learning to do. So Bruce Lipton's work on, he brought epigenetics out along with, you know, the whole quantum revolution that happened. which is really essentially, you know, that we are actually the observers of our own reality, and we are activating how the quantum field expresses itself. And we just, you know, instead of the Cabal being in charge of our perceptions, because it's like fighting for, you know, who's seeing what, you know, they're fighting for our frontal lobe, essentially. You know, if we can just stay focused on what it is that we want to see for ourselves, then that will set up a feedback or a signal into our own system, create that morphogenic field expression. And then we're activating that God gene within ourselves, which is really where we're going. Just takes practice, because we're a little bit...
Which is why, Amanda, which is why the attempt to hack the God gene right now is this game of the status quo, to support absolutely what you're saying. But that's the whole point of this lethal injection masquerading as a vaccine program is all about. It's all about hacking the God code of this Christic, realized, actualized human that is now surfacing. Finally, as the alchemization process comes to its culmination and the diamond is born through the coal, which is exactly what's happening. It is the last chance saloon for that draconian element to co-opt and try to contain, hang on to the ankles as we move into an ascension, so to speak. But Greg is an example coming forward as King John. I've known Greg for years, and I adore the man. I don't endorse the King John thing and the claims of the throne. I'm not interested in that nonsense. But I know Greg, and I understand that he's a fractal of humankind. And I think that what emerges of the Greg Hallett King John thing as a story, as an archetype, is that it represents the fact of the matter that I could take you, Amanda, and through the laws of separation, we could work out that you are also related to every president, every king, and every queen in history. Nowadays, we've become so homogenized, and in terms of blood chemistry, that we are all an enactment and an embodiment and a manifestation of the Alpha Omega of the Enki and Lil mythos, if that's what you're ascribing to. It's all contained and connected in the fractal dominion of you and I in the now. That's what the Greg Hallett thing was. It should just reflect to us that each one of us can lay claim to the scepter and the throne and the crown. And I think that's a really important story there. But going on to the other bit of the linguistic wave genetics that you are referring to, when you speak about empathy, us being able to feel one another's pain, and we can affect outcomes by being connected, epigenetics, all the rest of it. Dr. Gariev in Russia was the great master at this. Alas, he died a few months ago. But he proved that light carries light. He put a laser through a fly into another insect and grew some weird hybrid creature in the womb of the. So we know that light carries the sentient structure. We know that everything is space-born, airborne, light-born, vibration-born, sound-born. The fact is this. The importance is only this. To what extent do you situate yourself or find yourself in a state of bliss right here, right now? That's the only thing ultimately that matters, is your capacity to move through the fluctuations and the travesty of life and of existence and of experience and of all of the ebbs and flows and the orchestra of chaos around, and still manage to identify principally with that bliss, that inner still point, which is where the empathic waveform actualizes, connects morphogenetically to your brothers and sisters and your broader kin. And that's how we transmute one another. That's how we heal one another. That's the true transmission of grace. It is how I'm able to anchor and the empathic waveform limitlessly and transduce all the life force, the prana, all of this divine light coding that's streaming through me as a capacitor of divinity into the lateral plane. And consistently, whilst I'm awake, whilst I'm asleep, I am a broadcasting hub of that divine geometry of light. That's what we are now learning. That's what Bruce Lipton's work reminds us of, the interconnectedness biologically to all things in all ways.
So I have one more question, but I'd like to just leave it open for the group, just to see if there's anybody else that would like to ask a question. I'm just going to open it up to the group, to the gallery again. And is there anybody else here? We've got lots of wonderful new coordinators coming in to Connecting Consciousness from different places in Africa. And it's very exciting. So we kind of enjoying the spotlight and the lens of time together. We don't have it that often. Could have it more often. But is anybody else who would like to ask a question to Sacha? Is anything else that's coming to mind? Roy, you raising your hand?
Thank you, Amanda. Greetings, Sacha. Namaste.
All right.
Hi. My question is, what is your vision regarding how Africa, as a continent of sovereigns, potentially self-realized, moving from where we've come from, as you've described it, into a unity consciousness continent? What is going to bring about that shift from duality, from polarization and separation, to the brother sisterhood of the oneness of all men and women on this continent? How would it happen?
I think that the gift of the African in this temporal realm today is our intrinsic connectedness to the earth plane. The fact that the African soul is blood and mud in equal measure. We are barefoot by distinction as a peoples. There is a reason why Simon Parkes and myself are doing works in the Western world now, and others like us, yourselves included. Emphasis, white Africans needing to play an integral role in building a bridge which was torturously burnt by the imperial whites, continued today by the neo-colonial imperial whites, which, curious enough, are not even white. They are the Sabbatean cryptos that we're talking about, who control this agenda through the European Union, through the European Central Bank, through the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. They have continued to own Africa, to rape Africa, to carve up the resources of Africa. They're doing it through their dirty little white proxies in France, Germany, England, and Spain, Portugal, all around Europe. It's the old imperial hegemonists are now the salamander politicians and technocrats who control the ordinances, the statutes, the rules, the regulations, essentially around two things, law and economics. They own the ICC, International Criminal Court. What is the function of that court? Well, it is indeed an international criminal court. It is the crime itself. It's an embodiment of the highest crime. The ICC works at the behest of the European bankers. And what it does is it criminalizes good African leadership. It goes in and finds the Gaddafis and these leaders in Africa who are somewhat emancipated. It criminalizes them. It drags them into The Hague. It concocts all sorts of bullshit stories around it. It uses its weaponized crypto-Jewish media machine globally to desecrate the reputation of those political figures, those leaders. It uses its dirty coin to foment terrorism on the ground and all sorts of divisions in that local landscape, whether you're talking about Zimbabwe, where I grew up in that very environment, which was a Cold War playing out in Africa. It was a proxy war played out by these same interests. That's going on to this day. So that has not stopped. Africa is still the prime collateral behind so much of the global financial system and the global economy, because Africa is vast. Africa is so vast. I think I mentioned this in my last chat with you folks weeks ago. Africa is so vast that you can fit the whole of Europe, the whole of China, and North America into it. Did you know that? And a lot more of the world beside. So go and study the Mercator map, the map that we are engineered academically into believing, and then go and study the real map of Africa. It is vast. It's a huge continent. So in that sense, understand that Africa represents the true wealth. The Solomon's gold issues really from the belly of Africa. But it's the fact that we, good humans, blacks and whites of Africa, are connected, earthed, connected to the soil. And the suffrage, we've gone through a great deal of suffrage in order to earn that trusted role as custodians of the earth element. And we have to bring that groundedness now into the deception, the dream spell. So to answer your question, Roy, it is the African transmission of earth, of groundedness into the gestalt that will anchor the very nebulous dream spell of our false light reality, will reconvene with the earth through Africans and through Africa. And that's how the alchemy will play out in the social economy, in the social ecology, and in the geopolitical domain. You can look to Libya right now, and you will see that Libya is on the brink of a epochal resurrection. Libya is being reconstituted now as the gateway from Africa to the rest of the world, to take over the old spice, silk, and trade links and routes that have been contained by the Crown of England and the Chinese interests. And the communist aspect of China is the Crown of England. There's no separation between the two. In the same way that Russia was bastardized along that way with the whole Stalin sacrifice of innocence through the Stalin purges, which came off the back of the desecration of the Romanov dynasty, a true Christic noble lineage, incidentally. Point being that all of that rotten history is about to be subjugated and relegated to where it belongs. And we're going to see a resurrection of Africa occur. The financial emancipation or economic emancipation is already somewhat underway in parts of Africa, but don't expect to read that in your Bitcoin bulletins or on the CNN strap lines. But it's it's been repurposed. Donald Trump did a hell of a lot in his time in office to repurpose the true seats of the Federal Reserve to the true owners, put it that way. And that's underway. And I know I actually have one of the members of the ownership of the 2 seats of the Federal Reserve flying here to Mexico to meet me this weekend, and I'll be spending 3 days with him. But it's just the real story of Africa is about to surface, and I'm just grateful, very grateful to be part of this conversation. I'm not surprised that it's triggered by and through Simon and through connecting consciousness, because it's such a seminal golden thread in our resurrection, is a re-identification with the role that Africa is about to take as planetary leader.
Wow, very exciting. Thank you, Roy.
Just to tail on the end of that, Sacha, so with the grounding aspect, then one would expect to see a renaissance of African true cultures, as in performing arts, creative arts, music, drumming, and so forth.
Yes, and that will be the great spectacle that we can bear witness to in the coming days. The takedown of the legacy of Cecil John Rhodes and the Oppenheimer, De Beers, Rockefeller, Rothschild complex in Africa, which is to say the International Criminal Court and the ICC, ICJ, and the European Central Bank will be the trigger for that renaissance. The ending of the ICC's dominion over the fate of good African leadership and its constant fucking meddling in African affairs using international statutes dreamt up by these crypto Sabbatean Anglo-American banksters. Once that's dispensed with, and it's happening soon, then we will see that resurrection. Because if for no other reason, Roy, then it is the human's predisposition is to default into art, beauty, and consciousness. We have this incredible default written in to the genetic code, which is that we love having fun. We love creating. Why do you think we're of such spectacular interest to so many non-terrestrial intelligences? It's precisely because of this limitless flow of prana, of life force, which transcodes into a limitless capacity to create, to ideate, to manifest. That is what makes us so godly and so extraordinary. And once we've removed the tithes to the Caesars through the banking and the law forms, because banking language and legalese are very conjoined evil twins, and their function has been to mind fuck us into surrendering sovereignty, abnegating divinity, handing over all that we have to Cronus, the crown, and shuffling along like good little serfs before we perish on cue, according to the vaccine program or whatever else been dreamt up by these satanic pharmacists. Let's just leave it at that.
Thanks, Sacha. Thanks, Roy, very much. So are there any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to start to close. I'm not sure. Sacha, how are you doing for time?
I'm good for another 5-10 minutes,
okay.
if that's a...
Yes, thank you. That's wonderful. Anybody would like to comment, ask a last question before we close?
Amanda, can I ask something on a lighter note? Sacha, Sacha, on a lighter note, Did Jesus die?
So-
some people feel he died, some think he didn't. So,
So
did Jesus die on the cross?
I wasn't there, and I don't subscribe to the law of first report, so I don't repeat hearsay, because hearsay does not stand in natural law when it comes to these matters. Okay, I've not even got any real interest in the question. No disrespect at all. No disrespect. I have less than zero interest in the truth of that question, or whatever the truth may be, because I understand that the Christian metric is more violent and inverted than anything else if it comes at us through the written word, through the so-called scriptures. I have very little faith in scriptures. I've spent time with the Coptic bishops in the desert of Sketis at the Wadi al-Natrun monastery in Africa. I've spent time with the Ethiopian meisters as well. I have sat in circles with the evangelicals in sub-Saharan Africa, and I've witnessed their extraordinary testament as good Christians. I've done that under the Masasa trees in Africa. I get the connection between the living sons and daughters of God and the divine through the Christic or the Christic light, the Christed message, and this connection. But I have less than zero interest in what the man Jesus may have looked like, or what age he died at, or whether he went into a cave and came out again or not. I'm just not interested in any of that. I regard those as childish themes. I regard them as some of them beautiful apocryphal stories that can lead us into a higher moral and spiritual perspective. But I think that they have been so defiled and contaminated over the generations in the main by greedy priests and wicked kings, principalities and powers that the very Bible warns us against, that the whore of Babylon almost certainly wears a crucifix around her neck. Why does Christianity insist on the cult of death? That's a question that each true Christian must now ask themselves. Why are they obsessed with effigies of death? Why are they so obsessed with the notion that an intermediary, an intercessionary, a third party saves them from themselves? What does that truly teach us about our failure to stand up within our own divinity? For me, the Master Jesus does indeed walk barefoot in the Mount of Gethsemane, through Nazareth in the streets, and does cross Europe into Asia, and walks and boldly asks questions and has conversations and gets into fistfights and probably enjoys fucking women, for all I know. None of that to me is sacred or sacrosanct. That is the true telling of a true man, a true warrior. And that's my Jesus of Nazareth. That is my beloved. That's the man I hold in my heart. And his message translates to me through my own conduct, through my own surrender to the flame of pure truth, to stand in that flame and to never leave that flame. And if I do find myself out of that flame, I'll correct that within minutes. That for me is where we must take our covenant with Jesus, the Master. We must bring it into the blood and the bones of our own lives. We must learn the craft of embodiment, enactment of the gospel. Otherwise, it is dead words and dead ideas, and we are children playing on a dead playground. I hope I haven't offended you with any of that answer.
Thank you so much, Sacha. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to have to wrap it up now. It's been an amazing time together, as always. And thank you, Sacha, so much for your time and sharing just where you're at. It's always very enlightening to be with you and activating. And we're very happy to have you as the speaker on the equinox for us, 22nd of September. I think it's just about now that we have this perfect sacred pause to contemplate all of these things, and the excitement of going within to the soul within, the feminine soul within. That's one of the highlights, to think about the coding of that, and wow, I mean, that just blows my mind. So exciting. You know, you're taking the New Earth Haven inside, deep within.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Blessing. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Simon and Becky. So good to see your faces here, and thank you all. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sacha, for joining us. And it's lovely to see everyone here as well today.
Thank you, Simon and Becky, as well. We absolutely love you. Thank you for building this massive network for us. We are just enjoying ourselves so much with each other and dreaming into the future with all the projects and ideas. And we're just really happy to be together. So thank you so much for the network that you've given us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and a joy to show our support, and thank you for making the time. Lots of love.
Lots of love to you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Happy equinox, and we'll see you again soon. Lots of love, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.